The biblical writers were incredibly conservative with their ink. They did not waste words on trivial details. When you are reading ancient Hebrew history, you almost never get a weather report. You do not know if it was raining when David fought Goliath. You do not know if the wind was blowing when Jericho fell. The text simply does not care. The biblical authors recorded what was necessary to tell the theological story of God and his covenant people. And then we arrive at 2 Samuel chapter 23. This chapter sits at the very end of King David's story. The long wars are mostly over. The king is old. The writer is looking back, summarizing the reign, and giving honor to the men who held the kingdom together when it was fragile. The chapter is a ledger. It is a military roll call known as the roster of David's mighty men. If you read it straight through, it feels repetitive. It reads exactly like an ancient administrative document. It gives a name. It gives a father. It gives a hometown. It gives a brief summary of their military achievements. Eleazar stood his ground in a field of barley. Shammah defended a field of lentils. Abishai fought 300 men. The text is rapid, rhythmic, and matter-of-fact. But then, at verse 20, the rhythm breaks. The text introduces a man named Benaiah. The writer gives the standard administrative details. He is the son of Jehoiada. He is a valiant fighter from Kabzeel, but instead of moving quickly to the next soldier, the camera zooms in. The text slows down completely to describe a single, isolated, hyper-specific moment. The verse says Benaiah went down into a pit and killed a lion on a snowy day. A snowy day. Why do we need to know the temperature? Why does the biblical record pause to note the precipitation? In modern times, this verse has become famous. It has been turned into a motivational slogan. It is preached as a metaphor for chasing your dreams, facing your fears, and tackling the impossible. You will hear people say, if you want to do great things, you have to chase your lions. You have to be willing to fight in the snow. That sounds highly motivational, but it misses the profound reality of what the biblical author is actually doing. 2 Samuel was not written to be a self-help manual. It is a precise historical record of how the kingdom of God was established on earth through the line of David. Benaiah is not a standalone action hero. He is not a metaphor for personal ambition. Most people think this is just a random tale of ancient, reckless bravery. A cool story included to show how tough David's men were. But Benaiah's descent into that frozen pit is actually a deliberate, carefully crafted portrait of hidden faithfulness. This single, violent moment is the exact event that qualified this man to step into the king's inner circle. It is the event that led him to guard King David's life. And as we will soon see, it is the event that prepared him to do the dark, difficult work of securing the kingdom of peace under King Solomon. To understand Benaiah, we have to strip away the motivational speeches and look at the actual text. Because there is a reason the biblical writer stops the ledger to give us the weather report. The snow is not a random detail. It is the key to the whole scene. Before we look at the pit, we have to look at the man. 2 Samuel gives us his father's name. Benaiah is the son of Jehoiada. In the ancient biblical world, genealogies were not just family trees. They were resumes. They were identity markers. The name of your father told everyone where you came from, what your standing was, and what was expected of you. If you cross-reference this specific name with 1 Chronicles chapter 27, a massive detail emerges. Jehoiada was not just a man from the tribe of Judah. He was a chief priest. This detail changes the entire profile of Benaiah. In ancient Israel, priests had a very specific, carefully guarded lane. They belonged in the tabernacle. They managed the holy things. They dealt with the blood of sacrifices, not the blood of enemies. Priests were governed by strict laws of ritual purity. Touching a dead body made a priest ceremonially unclean. They were meant to be men of the sanctuary, set apart for worship and mediation. But Benaiah is a man of the sword. He is a killer. He is out in the wild, touching the dead, breaking every boundary of ritual purity. Look at the names involved. His father's name, Jehoiada, means Yahweh knows. His father gives him the name Benaiah, which means Yahweh has built. These are profoundly theological names. These are not the names of pagan mercenaries. These are the names of a family deeply devoted to the covenant of Israel. The text also notes his hometown. It says Benaiah was a valiant fighter from Kabzeel. Kabzeel was not a soft, comfortable town near Jerusalem. It was a frontier settlement. It was located in the extreme south of Judah. right on the edge of the harsh Negev desert. It was border territory. It was the kind of place that produced hard, weathered people. So a clear picture begins to form. You have the son of a high-ranking priest, raised with the theological name Yahweh has built, living on the harsh desert frontier, who somehow becomes one of the most lethal men in David's army. Why did he leave the priesthood to become a warrior? The biblical text does not tell us directly, but historically, we know what was happening in Israel during this time. During the reign of King Saul, the priesthood was corrupted. It was compromised. And eventually, Saul massacred the priests at Nob. Meanwhile, David was an outlaw, hiding in the wilderness. He was the true anointed king, but he was on the run. David attracted the outcasts, the disillusioned, and those who saw that God's favor had left the throne and moved to the desert. Benaiah traded the safety of his priestly lineage for the danger of David's wilderness. He chose loyalty over comfort. He lived in a state of constant ritual uncleanness so that the kingdom of God could be secured. He is not a mercenary looking for a paycheck. He is a covenant man fighting for God's anointed king in an era of total chaos. But knowing his background only makes his military record more surprising, because the biblical writer does not just say he was a good soldier. The writer does not give us a generic summary of his career. Instead, the text lists 3 specific victories, 3 isolated, bizarre, highly detailed moments of combat, and every single one of them shares the exact same terrifying pattern. So how does the son of a high priest end up covered in blood in a frozen hole? To understand that, we have to look at his 3 impossible fights. 2 Samuel chapter 23 lists 3 specific victories for Benaiah. These are not large-scale military campaigns. They are not massive army movements. The text focuses on 3 isolated moments of hand-to-hand, violently intimate combat. First, the text says he struck down 2 of Moab's best men. The Hebrew phrasing here is fascinating. It describes these men using the word Ariel, which translates to something like Lion of God. These were Moabite champions. They were elite, fierce, terrifying warriors, and there were 2 of them. Second, the text says he went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed an actual lion. Third, he struck down a massive Egyptian warrior. The biblical writer gives us the exact details of the weapons involved. The Egyptian had a massive spear in his hand. Benaiah only had a staff, which was essentially a heavy wooden club. The text says, Benaiah went down to him, snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand, and killed the giant with his own weapon. If you read these 3 victories quickly, they just sound like ancient action scenes. They sound like the exaggerated boasts of a warrior culture. But look closer. There is a distinct, undeniable pattern governing all 3 fights. In every single battle, Benaiah is at a severe disadvantage. He is never on equal footing. He never has the upper hand. The conditions are always wrong. In the first fight with the Moabites, he is outnumbered. It is 2 against 1, and his opponents are elite champions. In the third fight with the Egyptian, he is completely outweaponed and outsized. You do not fight a giant wielding a spear with a short wooden staff. The reach of the spear alone makes it a suicide mission. And in the second fight, the literal lion in the pit, he is entirely outpositioned. He is trapped in an enclosed space, fighting an apex predator, in freezing conditions. The biblical author is doing something deliberate by placing these 3 stories side by side. The text is not just telling us that Benaiah is physically strong. It is revealing a highly specific psychological and spiritual profile. Benaiah is a man who operates in the deficit. He does not wait for ideal conditions. He does not need the high ground. He does not need superior weaponry. He does not require a fair fight to secure a victory. Notice the direction he moves in these stories. When the odds are entirely against him, he does not retreat. He advances. He goes against the 2 champions. He goes down to the giant. He goes down into the pit. This is exactly the kind of man David needed. David's kingdom was not built in safe, sterile environments. It was built in the wilderness. It was built by outcasts who knew how to survive when everything was against them. But of these 3 battles, the middle one stands out as the most bizarre. Killing Moabite champions makes sense for an Israelite soldier. Killing an Egyptian giant makes sense for a military man defending the border. But a lion? Lions are not enemy combatants. Lions do not wear armor or hold territory. And why does the biblical record give us the exact weather conditions for this fight, and this fight alone? Every single battle shares the exact same pattern of extreme disadvantage. But it is the second battle, the one with the lion, that reveals the deepest truth about his character. He went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. Say that sentence out loud. It is so brief, so matter-of-fact, that we easily rush past the actual physics of what is happening. But let us break down the anatomy of this disadvantage. Let us look at the three elements the biblical writer specifically chose to record: the beast, the location, and the weather. First, the beast. An Asiatic lion. These were apex predators roaming the ancient Near East. They were massive, territorial, and lethal. When a lion came near a human settlement, the natural human response was elevation and distance. You get high up. You use arrows. You use long spears from behind a stone wall. You use the advantage of human intelligence to keep the predator at bay. But Benaiah does not seek elevation. He does not keep his distance. The text says, he went down. He goes down into a pit. In ancient Israel, a pit was typically a cistern carved out of limestone to catch winter rain. They usually had a narrow opening at the top and widened out into a bell shape at the bottom. They were enclosed, damp, and completely cut off from the world above. Fighting in a pit removes the single most important advantage a human has in combat: lateral movement. There is no room to circle. There is no room to evade. There is no escape route. When you are in a cistern with a trapped predator, the fight is absolute. It is a collision. Only one living thing is coming back out of that hole. But the writer gives us one more detail: the weather. It was a snowy day. Snow in the biblical lands is relatively rare and extremely disruptive. When the temperature drops below freezing, human biology becomes a liability. Think about what extreme cold does to the human body. Blood leaves the hands and feet to protect the vital organs. Fingers go numb. Grip strength fails. Reflexes slow down. Human skin against wet, freezing limestone is a recipe for disaster. A lion has a thick hide. A lion has claws that anchor into the ground. The cold does not strip away the lion's weapons, but the cold strips away every physical advantage a human possesses. This is a portrait of maximum vulnerability and sensory deprivation. The biblical text does not tell us why the lion was in the pit. We do not know if the beast fell in and was polluting a town's water supply. We do not know if Benaiah was ambushed. We do not know if he deliberately tracked the animal through the snow to protect a vulnerable village. The biblical writer leaves out the backstory on purpose. The reason is omitted because the conditions are what matter. The writer wants to show us a man who operates faithfully when the environment is hostile, the odds are impossible, and nobody is watching. This was not a glorious battlefield. There were no trumpets. There were no banners. There was no army watching from the ridge to celebrate his bravery. It was an ugly, brutal, desperate struggle in the freezing dark. But here is what makes this specific detail so fascinating. In the ancient Near East, fighting a lion was not a unique concept. In fact, it was a cultural obsession. If you look at the archaeology of the surrounding nations, you will find that stories about killing lions were everywhere. Ancient kings loved to tell these stories. They carved them into their palace walls. They used them as royal propaganda to prove their divine right to rule. But when you compare Benaiah's hidden battle to the stories of the mighty empires around him, a shocking contrast emerges. If you study the ancient empires of Assyria, Babylon, or Egypt, you will find a recurring image carved into their palace walls. You will see the king hunting a lion. In the ancient Near East, the lion hunt was the ultimate symbol of royal power. It was how a monarch proved to his people that he was strong enough to hold back the forces of chaos. The kings of Assyria were famous for this. They commissioned massive stone reliefs, showing themselves firing arrows into the chests of roaring lions. But these royal hunts were completely staged. They were ancient propaganda campaigns. The king did not go out into the wild alone. He rode in a reinforced chariot. He was surrounded by a phalanx of elite spearmen. Often, the lions were captured ahead of time, kept in wooden cages, and then released into a closed arena or a carefully guarded hunting park. The king had the high ground. He had the best weapons. He had a literal army standing by in case something went wrong. The entire event was heavily guarded, highly publicized, and designed to guarantee the king's victory. Now, compare that royal spectacle to Benaiah. The biblical writer wants you to see the contrast. Benaiah has no chariot. He has no royal armor. He has no backup squad of spearmen waiting to step in. He is not in an arena designed for his success. He is at the bottom of a slippery limestone cistern. But the most important difference is the audience. The kings of the ancient world killed lions in front of crowds so that poets would write songs about their greatness. But Benaiah fights on a snowy day. Think about what snow means in an ancient agrarian society. It means the roads are empty. It means everyone is inside around a fire. It means there is no foot traffic. There is no audience. No one is watching. If Benaiah dies in that pit, the snow covers his tracks, and no one ever knows what happened to the son of Jehoiada. He just disappears. This was not a performance. This was anti-heroic. It was a violent, desperate, necessary act done in complete obscurity. And this is where we begin to understand why this specific story is included in the permanent biblical record. The biblical text is not interested in ancient propaganda. It is interested in the architecture of faithfulness. Benaiah demonstrates a loyalty that does not require an audience. He is willing to do the darkest, most dangerous work in the most isolated places, simply because the work has to be done. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random list of military statistics. We have a priest who became a warrior, a man who consistently moves toward the disadvantage, a soldier who fights in the freezing dark when no one is watching. He is the absolute opposite of a king in a chariot, and that is exactly what caught the attention of King David. David did not need men who only fought well when the sun was shining and the trumpets were blowing. David knew the kingdom of God was held together by men who were faithful in the shadows. After all, David himself was once a forgotten shepherd boy who killed a lion in secret to protect his father's sheep. David recognized his own history in Benaiah's quiet violence. Benaiah's victory in the pit did not just earn him a line in a ledger. It triggered a massive promotion. He was pulled out of the regular army and given a position of terrifying trust. Benaiah becomes the man who sleeps outside the king's door. But his most important work was not going to be for David. It was going to be for the son who came next. 2 Samuel chapter 23 gives us the immediate result of Benaiah's strange battles. Verse 23 says he was held in greater honor than any of the 30 mighty men, but he was not included among the elite 3. And then the text tells us exactly what David did with him. David put him in charge of his personal bodyguard. Notice what David does not do. David does not make Benaiah the commander of the entire army. That massive, highly visible position belonged to a man named Joab. Joab was a brilliant general, but he was also a ruthless politician. Joab knew how to move thousands of troops, manipulate public opinion, and win massive victories. But David gave Benaiah something entirely different. He did not give him public glory. He gave him ultimate proximity. If you look at 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 18, the text tells us exactly who Benaiah was commanding. It says he was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Who were they? They were not standard Israelite soldiers. They were foreign mercenaries. They were elite warriors from the coastal regions, likely related to the Philistines. They were fiercely loyal, but their loyalty was not to the 12 tribes of Israel, and it was not to the politics of the nation. Their loyalty was tied directly and completely to the person of King David. And David places Benaiah, the son of an Israelite priest, in command of these foreign shock troops. Why? Because David understood exactly what happened in that frozen cistern. A man who fights a lion in a pit on a snowy day is a man with a highly specific psychological profile. He does not care about an audience. He does not need ideal conditions. He does not retreat when the odds are entirely against him. And most importantly, he does what is terribly necessary in the dark. That is exactly who you want, commanding the men who sleep outside your door. A king does not need a politician guarding his bedroom. He needs a man of uncompromising, hidden faithfulness. He needs a man who cannot be bought, who cannot be intimidated, and who will not hesitate when violence breaks into the inner courts. David saw that Benaiah was a man of the deficit, a man who absorbed chaos so that others could live in peace. Pause for a second and look at the trajectory of this man's life. He starts in the priestly lineage, carrying a name that means Yahweh has built. He moves to the harsh southern frontier of Kabzeel. He proves his loyalty by fighting impossible battles in absolute obscurity. And because he was faithful in the frozen dark, he is brought into the very center of the kingdom of God on earth. He becomes the shadow behind the throne. For years, Benaiah commanded the king's guard. He watched David grow old, He watched the kingdom suffer through family rebellions, civil wars, and deep moral failures. He stood his post while politicians tried to tear the kingdom apart from the inside. He was the quiet, immovable wall between David and the chaos of the world. But as David approached the end of his life, the kingdom grew unstable again. The transition of power was not going to be clean. A new king was about to be crowned, and the survival of the Davidic dynasty was hanging by a thread. Benaiah became the man who slept outside the king's door. But his ultimate purpose in the biblical narrative was not just to protect the aging king. His most difficult, most permanent work was still ahead of him. It was not going to be for David. It was going to be for the son who came next. 1 Kings opens with a kingdom on the edge of collapse. King David is dying. He is weak, shivering in his bed, and losing his grip on the nation. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power is no different. While David is dying, his oldest surviving son, Adonijah, decides to seize the throne. He throws a massive feast. He gathers chariots. He gathers priests. Most dangerously, he recruits Joab. Joab is the legendary commander of the Israelite army. If Joab supports Adonijah, the military supports Adonijah. The coup is practically secure. But David has already sworn that his younger son, Solomon, will be the next king. When David hears about the rebellion, he does not call the regular army. The regular army is compromised. He calls a very specific group of men. He calls Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. David orders Benaiah to take the Cherethites and Pelethites, the personal royal guard, and escort Solomon to the spring of Gihon to be anointed king. The presence of Benaiah changes everything. When Adonijah and his guests hear the trumpets, and they hear that Benaiah and the royal guard are securing the city for Solomon, the rebellion instantly shatters. The guests scatter in terror. They know they cannot fight the men who sleep outside the king's door. Solomon is crowned, but the danger is not over. Solomon is destined to be the king of peace. His very name, Shlomo, comes from the Hebrew word shalom, meaning peace, wholeness, and completion. He is the king who will finally build the temple of God, but a kingdom of peace cannot be built while the architects of chaos are still in the room. David gives Solomon final instructions before he dies. He tells his son that certain men must be dealt with, men like Joab, who have shed innocent blood in times of peace, men who will constantly threaten the stability of the throne. Solomon has to establish peace, but peace often requires a final, terrible confrontation with chaos. Solomon does not do this violent work himself. He turns to the man who has spent his entire life operating in the deficit. He turns to Benaiah. 1 Kings, chapter 2 is a dark, heavy sequence. Adonijah tries to manipulate his way back to power. Solomon sends Benaiah, and Benaiah strikes him down. Then comes Joab. Joab knows he is dead. He flees to the sacred tent and grabs the horns of the altar, claiming sanctuary. Think about this moment. Benaiah is the son of a high priest. He knows the holiness of the altar, but he also knows that the law of Moses explicitly states that a willful murderer cannot use the altar as a shield. Joab is a killer who shed the blood of innocent men. He is trying to use holy things to protect his political corruption. Benaiah is not intimidated by false piety. He receives the order from the king, and he strikes Joab down right beside the altar. Finally, there is a traitor named Shimei, who eventually breaks a royal oath. Solomon sends Benaiah, and Benaiah strikes him down. The sequence is brutal, but it is not random violence. It is surgical. It is the necessary removal of the rot that was threatening to destroy the Davidic line. After this heavy, bloody work is finished, 1 Kings chapter 2 ends with a massive statement. Verse 46 says, "The kingdom was now firmly established in Solomon's hands." And in the very next breath, the text says Solomon promoted Benaiah. Benaiah replaced Joab as the supreme commander of the entire army. The kingdom of peace was secured by the man who was willing to do the ugly, necessary work in the dark. This reveals the true meaning of Benaiah's life. The man who conquered the chaos in the pit was the exact man chosen to remove the chaos from the throne, which changes everything about how we read that first snowy day. We started this journey with a single verse. 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 20. A man, a pit, a lion, and a snowy day. In modern times, it is incredibly easy to read this verse and turn Benaiah into a metaphor for personal ambition. We are told to go out and conquer our fears. We are told to chase our lions. We are told that if we want to achieve great things in life, we have to be willing to step into the snow. That sounds motivating, but it completely flattens what the biblical text is actually doing. Benaiah was not chasing personal greatness. He was not trying to build his own empire. The biblical writer did not include this highly specific detail to give us a self-help slogan. The writer included it to give us a theology of the pit. Look back at the entire portrait the text has painted. We have a man whose very name means Yahweh has built. He is the son of a high priest who traded the safety and prestige of the sanctuary for the harsh reality of the borderlands. He consistently moved toward the deficit. He fought 2 elite Moabite champions. He fought an Egyptian giant with nothing but a wooden staff. And then, he fought an apex predator in a freezing cistern. The weather report was not included to make the story sound more dramatic. The snow was recorded to prove that the roads were empty. The snow proves that Benaiah had no audience. The kings of the ancient empires hunted lions in chariots, surrounded by elite guards, entirely for the sake of public glory. They wanted the world to see their strength. They wanted poets to write songs about their bravery. Benaiah fought in the dark. He fought in a place of maximum physical vulnerability. He did what was terrifying and violently necessary when absolutely no one was watching. And because he was faithful in the unseen, freezing dark, he was trusted with the very center of the kingdom. He became the commander of the elite royal guard. He slept outside King David's door. And when the time came to transition the nation from a kingdom of war to a kingdom of peace, King Solomon did not trust the regular politicians or the famous generals. He trusted the man who knew how to handle chaos in an enclosed space. The biblical pattern here is quietly profound. God builds his kingdom with people who are willing to do the uncelebrated, necessary work in the shadows. Most of true covenant faithfulness happens in the snow. It happens when there is no applause. It happens in the quiet, isolated, sometimes terrifying moments of life when you are forced to confront the chaos right in front of you. It happens when the conditions are entirely wrong, when you are operating at a severe disadvantage. The modern world tells you to broadcast every victory. The world wants you to build a monument to your own strength. But the biblical text elevates the man in the hidden cistern. The story of Benaiah changes how we view our own moments of obscurity. When you are in a season that feels isolated, cold, and entirely hidden from the rest of the world, you are not necessarily being ignored. You might be in the exact environment where God is forging the specific kind of loyalty that his kingdom requires. God does not need our staged, heavily guarded victories. He is looking for the quiet, unyielding faithfulness that holds the line when no one else is looking. The people who are ultimately trusted to secure the peace are the ones who were first willing to face the deepest conflicts without asking for an audience. The snowy day was never just a weather report. It was the silent, freezing space where God proved the man who would quietly guard the throne.